Welcome, everyone. Let me first congratulate all of the winners in state races last night, including most prominently my friend and colleague, Chris Murphy. Obviously, we congratulate all the winners in the state races as well. And there's a lot to be happy about in Connecticut today. But there's no sugarcoating the results at the national level. I'm deeply disappointed. And let me just be absolutely clear. I intend to do what I've always done, which is to fight for the people of Connecticut and hold accountable anyone who abuses their power, anyone who does harm to the people I represent. I will continue to work across the aisle whenever possible on issues where we should have common ground, particularly to make the economy work better for everyone, lower the prices of goods and services that everyday Americans buy, open more job opportunities, and make clear that our economy has to grow and provide benefits for everyone. And reproductive rights. Wherever possible, we have to work for women's freedoms, kids' safety online, and voting rights. But I'm also going to stand strong for issues and values and freedoms that are in danger, like a woman's right to choose when and whether to have children, civil rights and civil liberties, gun violence protection and prevention. I'm especially regretful about the losses of two colleagues, John Tester and Sherrod Brown. I don't know whether any of you saw last night's concession speech from Sherrod, but I was moved by it, and I agree with him that whatever happened in this election, we will continue to believe in the dignity of work, the importance of fighting for everyday Americans over special interests, standing up to corporate giants when they endanger people's rights, and making sure that we continue to fight for the people who make America work, which are everyday Americans, working people, and families. With that, I will turn it over to our Lieutenant Governor.
Thank you so much, Senator Blumenthal. The governor and I are deeply disappointed with the result of the presidential election. However, we're very pleased that we will be sending back our federal delegation to Washington, D.C., and we are looking forward to working with the new people who have been elected here in our state. And the work starts today. We want to reassure the people of Connecticut that our values are still the same, that we will stand up for reproductive rights and healthcare access, that we will stand up strongly for LGBTQ+ rights. We will stand up strongly for labor rights. We will continue to lead on gun safety and civil rights and the freedom of thought and expression. And we will continue to welcome new people to our state who come from other countries and make our state stronger and more vibrant. And we're going to continue to be a bulwark for the nation. We have led under our governor's great leadership in so many areas, like paid leave, like youth mental health, like reproductive health care access, our assault weapon ban, and so much more. And so I will say that Governor Lamont and I have worked with President Trump in the past, and we will be reaching out to them and to J.D. Vance because we want to work together on behalf of the people of Connecticut. And the governor and I are going to continue to focus on pocketbook issues, which the voters in our state and in our country have made clear they want us to focus on. And so we're going to be working on building more affordable housing, making sure that we make our state more affordable through tax cuts and through fiscal responsibility. We're going to be assisting small businesses and bringing good companies to our state to help create good jobs. And we are going to also work on expanding access to high quality and affordable child care. I want to say also, as someone who's the former Secretary of the State, how pleased I was to see how many people took advantage of early voting. More than 740,000 people took advantage of early voting. More than 100,000 people voted by absentee ballot, and I was very pleased to see that our universal absentee ballot voting initiative passed with flying colors. So with that, it's my pleasure to turn this over to our Attorney General, William Tong.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. Good morning. 8 years ago, we went to bed not knowing what was going to happen, and 10-year-old at that time, Eleanor Tong, shook me in bed and woke me up. And I opened my eyes, and she said, "Ba, what happened?" I didn't have a good answer then. It was very disorienting then, and I didn't know what had happened. 8 years later, I spoke to Eleanor this morning. She's 18 now. She's a college freshman. And Penelope, who's 16, and my son Sasha, who's 13. And they asked me the same questions. And again, I didn't have any good answers. It's very disorienting for all of us, very disappointing. And on many of these questions, I don't know. What I do know is that our job together, my job, is to protect the people of this state. We are going to do that job. We are never going to back down in protecting the people and the families of Connecticut. And so we are going to be as strong as ever in protecting the rights of all people, including women, and their fundamental rights and reproductive freedom. We're going to do everything we can to protect our families and our kids. We know this pain better than anybody. Protect our kids and our families and our schools from the threat of gun violence. We're going to stand strong and protect immigrants who contribute so much to Connecticut and to our country. We're going to continue to protect and defend the rights of working people, to advocate for fair wages and benefits, to put food on the table for their families, to make a living wage, to make it possible to do better for themselves and their kids, and to organize in the workplace. And we're going to continue to fight hard for the LGBTQ plus community and protect and defend them every single day. The American people have spoken. We're still unpacking what they said. I think it's very clear that a lot of people are hurting right now, and we have to hear that here in Connecticut and across our state. They're hurting because the cost of groceries and food is escalating at an unsustainable pace. And speaking for our office, we're going to continue and ramp up our investigation of food and grocery prices. Prescription drugs, the comptroller and I, our chief healthcare officer, we focus on prescription drugs. We just won a major case against a drug compounder who was ripping off people here in Connecticut, a $39 million judgment. I just announced 2 major settlements against the generic drug industry. We're going to continue to take the fight to the big pharmaceutical companies to drive down the prices of prescription drugs. We're going to focus on public health, making sure that parents and families have access to vaccines. We're going to continue our fight against the climate crisis and big oil, who are responsible and must be held accountable. And yes, we have to really lean in and focus on the price of energy and the cost of utilities here in this state. And speaking again from my office, we're going to work hard and oppose these exorbitant increases that some of our state's utilities are asking for, to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars, and we're going to hold them accountable. I want everyone in Connecticut to know and understand that I'm in close communication every single day. I was yesterday, I am today, with my fellow attorneys general across the country. And I'm going to lean into my role now as the Vice President of the National Association of Attorneys General to work with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle. But let me say that my Democratic colleagues are unified. We are locked arm in arm. This firewall that we built is as strong as it has ever been. And if anybody tries to come into our states and take advantage of, rip off, or attack the people and families in our states, we will stop them. That's our job, and we're going to continue to do it. Thank you. And I said the Chief Healthcare Officer, our Comptroller, Sean Scanlon.
Good morning, everybody. You know, as an elected official, and frankly, even as a person, it can sometimes be hard to know what to say these days because of the times that we're living in. And already this morning, it's been an early morning, but I've been asked, what does this mean? What's going to happen? Where do we go from here? 100 times. And I think that there can be two answers to that. Because this morning, when half our state woke up, they were in tears. They were scared, they were frustrated, they were angry, they were hurting. That was happening in my own household, in my own family. It's also true that in the other half of the state, people woke up with elation and joy, feeling heard, feeling excited, feeling like there was a promise of change on the issues that they care about. And as elected officials, we have an obligation to meet both of those people in the road called Connecticut. And so, like all of my colleagues up here, for the people who woke up scared and angry and concerned, know that your elected leaders here in Connecticut will continue to fight for Connecticut values and to make sure that those Connecticut values are protected here in the state that we love. But to the other half of the state, including members of my own immediate family who voted for the other guy, just know that we will continue to work across the aisle when we can. And that the beauty in my mind, having served in the legislature for 8 years and now been comptroller for 2, is that we can still get things done on a bipartisan basis here in Connecticut, and we should, because that is, I think, what the American people want. Maybe the extremes of both parties don't want that, but by and large, I truly believe that most people in the state and country want us to work together, and we should. And this election should not change that. I would say, though, as a politician, I think it is important that the Democratic Party learn the right lessons from the loss that we experienced last night, because it was a loss. And we should not sugarcoat that, we should not avoid that, we should not blame the American people for that. We need to look in the mirror and we need to think about what it is that we want to do going forward as a party to continue to lead and to continue to win elections, which we will. And I'm confident of that. And I would urge people across the country looking for answers of how we do that to look at Connecticut, because the Connecticut way is working. I think you see that in the results that came in yesterday. I think you see that in what we do in this building under the leadership of our governor. And I think you will continue to see that now in a divided government, where here in Connecticut, Democrats were victorious. We continue to hold all of the positions that we held before. We will now be working with a government in Washington that may be completely controlled by the other side. And we will find ways to work with them when we can, but we cannot be afraid to look in the mirror and ask ourselves tough questions of how we got here, because that is what I think people in this state will want us to do going forward, thinking about the next elections that we ultimately will be in. Last thing I would say is this. Yesterday, the most heartening thing that I experienced at the 12 or 14 polling places that I went to, and a surprising experience, was the civility that was happening between candidates and supporters of the different parties. I watched Shahana Hayes and a woman that had a Make America Great Again shirt have a lovely conversation for 15 minutes in Plainville that honestly inspired me, because for as divided as we have been as a country, for as difficult as the last few years have been politically, I think that there is a genuine interest on people on both sides to end this craziness and to make it better. And I think while that result of yesterday's election did create divided government, I think each of us have a responsibility to try to find a way to call all of our constituents to the better versions of themselves, to be better versions of ourselves as leaders. And I congratulate President-elect Trump on his victory yesterday, and I hope that he heeds that message too. All of us, Democrat, Republican, have to be better when it comes to the actions and the rhetoric that we use. And I hope that this can be a new day. And I hope that yesterday, what I saw at these polling places is a sign that this is what the people want and that people on both sides do hear that. So with that, I will turn it over to our governor, and again, somebody who I feel like is an example that people should look at of how we can get this right. He has been doing that. He will continue to do that. And I'm proud to introduce our governor, Governor Lamont.
Well, thanks, Sean, and everybody. Just a follow-up from Sean. I mean, I'm really proud of Connecticut. You know, standing up was an incredibly contentious 120 days of national campaigning in particular, and people were talking about civil wars and a lot of worries out there. We had a very peaceful election, and it was civil, and Connecticut people looked out for each other on both sides of the aisle, and I was proud of that. I kind of like the response here in Connecticut. I think we got it right. You know, as Dick pointed out, starting with Chris Murphy and our entire congressional delegation. It's an amazing delegation working every day on behalf of the state. We actually picked up a few seats in the legislature. I don't think there's many other states in the country on the Democratic side that are able to say that. And I'd like to think they believe that we're working on behalf of you every day and doing everything we can to make your lives better and a little more affordable in a place where you and your kids want to be. And I appreciate William and Dick and standing up, and we're going to fight like heck to protect our Connecticut values every day. And Susan and I are right there alongside you. I also have another role as governor, and that's to congratulate President Trump. And the day after the election, we all come together as one and look out for the best interests of our country. And as a governor, it's very important that I work with the White House. I wish the outcome was different, but I have worked with President Trump before, and I can work with President-elect Trump. I will tell you that our commissioners are all been tasked trying to see, what does this election mean? What does that mean in terms of the people of Connecticut? What does that mean in terms of our budget? What does that mean in terms of our priorities? I just give you a couple of teasers. You know, the environment was a loser in this election. We're going to look hard at what happens to the Inflation Reduction Act. My hunch is there'll probably be a few less tax credits for wind power, probably a few more tax credits for nuclear power, and we're going to have to take a good hard look at how we continue to meet our energy needs given the new lay of the land. I worry about health care. You know, there's been a lot of loose talk about Obamacare, and do we keep it, do we save it, do we change it, do we destroy it? And I do worry that we're going to take a good hard look and make sure that the changes that could be coming, not immediately, but over the next year or so, could really drive up the cost of health care for working families in this state and in this country. And that's something we've got our team working on as well. Obviously, when it comes to core Connecticut values like a woman's right to choose, you know, I worry. The president can appoint a new FDA commissioner who can say whatever he or she wants about mifepristone and whether that ought to be available or available by mail. There's dramatic things that a president can do almost by executive power. And that's something I watch very carefully. And just on a personal note, I was with the kids on Halloween, and they were all lined up, and who are you going to call? and they really were paying attention to this election. And just some of them coming up to me, kids of color, maybe Hispanic kids, a lot of loose talk about deportation and things. You know, some kids that, you know, a trans kid who just, you know, they spend hundreds of millions of dollars mocking kids like this over the last, you know, 3 or 4 months. And I just like to give a message. You know, here in Connecticut, we love you. We're all God's children. Your friends want to see you in school tomorrow, and that's what it means to be in Connecticut. That's it for me. Thanks.
Governor, you talked about early direction to the commissioners to do an assessment of what it might mean. Mr. Tom referred to a firewall. What assurances can you give today as to what Connecticut's posture will be as far as resisting orders directed at mass deportation or removing undocumented children from public schools, that kind of thing?
I'd probably call it my Attorney General.
So we have a Trust Act, Trust Act 1, Trust Act 2. That's the law of Connecticut, and we're gonna enforce it. Immigration law enforcement is the province of the federal government, and we're not gonna do their job for them. We're gonna protect Connecticut families. We all talked about Connecticut immigrants, and immigrant families are Connecticut families too, and they're our priority. Well, look, we've been presented with, as we lawyers say, a parade of horribles. Just in the last 2 weeks, a litany of things that it appears the president-elect could do, and the top of the list seems to be some effort at mass deportation. I don't know what that looks like. I don't know how it's going to manifest, but I can tell you when Trump 1.0, hardly a day went by when the governor and I, you know, didn't get a call about somebody who was being targeted. There were episodes of people hiding out in churches. There were episodes of people who were, you know, retreated and locked themselves behind locked doors in courthouses. It is my very sincere hope that we don't see that again, but we've seen this movie before and we're ready for it.
How concerned are you about reproductive rights? Connecticut has done several things to protect not only Connecticut women, but also women coming from other states. Donald Trump has been somewhat flip-floppy on what he will and will not do. How does that affect how Connecticut operates?
So I'm extraordinarily concerned because I know that not just the president-elect and some of his proxies have spoken about, you know, punishment for women, for example, who may seek reproductive health care. I know that my colleague in Texas, Ken Paxton, is trying to gain access to health care records of women who are seeking access to reproductive health care in Texas and outside of Texas. So I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I think all of us are extraordinarily concerned about that.
Let me add a point there. You know, let's be very clear-eyed here. A national ban on abortion will preempt state law in Connecticut. That's just a reality of the federal system. So we need to be prepared for a fight. There's no question that people around this president want to ban abortion across the country. But the strong, growing, powerful weight of public opinion in this country is for reproductive freedoms. And that is illustrated, in fact, by yesterday's votes in Missouri and Arizona for referenda that will protect a woman's right to choose, and in Florida, even though it wasn't 60%, powerful, strong voice of the American people in favor of women deciding their own freedom. And I can tell you, If we're in for a fight, we're ready. We're ready, able, and willing to make that fight at the national level. No question that we will have allies on the Republican side because they may have been failing in the past to stand up and speak out. But if a national ban on abortion is threatened, I believe we can work across the aisle with Republican allies at the national level to avoid a law that would preempt the state laws in Connecticut that protect a woman's right to decide her own future.
Senator, do you anticipate Democrats making use of filibuster in the Senate to prevent some of the things you just outlined there? I mean, and do you anticipate there might be any change to a filibuster rule?
I don't think there will be a change to the filibuster rule because, for better or worse, my Republican colleagues have steadfastly opposed it. When it's been raised, they voted against it. And the next majority leader of the United States Senate, whether it's Thune or Cornyn, both are on record against changing the filibuster rule. So I think that's one way in which we can prevent the national ban on abortion that may be threatened. But let's be very clear. We need to fight abuses of power and hold accountable anyone who abuses power or does harm to the American people. And that includes a potential national ban on abortion. And we have Republican allies. And so even if the filibuster were ended, I think we could defeat a national ban on abortion. There's no question where the people of the United States are on this issue. Whatever they may think of abortion for their families or themselves, they believe it should be a decision that each individual woman makes for herself. That's the basic principle. Reproductive freedom is a core freedom, and we need to stand strong not only for that freedom, but for others that may be threatened by misuse of the Insurrection Act to send the military in to silence protests, or use of the Justice Department to seek retribution against political enemies. These fundamental freedoms are at stake. Whatever the president may be saying, my worry is as much people who are around him and who may have influence in this administration. So we're ready for the fight. We're able to do it. We can win it.
On the highest level, though, notwithstanding a handful of seats here in Connecticut, it looks like voters across every recordable category are shifting away from Democrats. I work for the governor, Senator Blumenthal. Do you view this election as repudiation nationally of your party?
Of
Of the Democrats?
Do I view it as a repudiation of Democrats?
Yeah.
No, absolutely not. First of all, the country voted for two individuals, or voted between two individuals. I'm not going to be the political analyst this morning. We'll have plenty of time to digest and analyze the reasons for the vote in favor of Donald Trump. But it's a disappointment, but not a failure. We continue to stand strong for the freedoms and principles that lead us to fight for working people, freedoms of reproductive rights, the kinds of economic opportunities that people ought to be accorded, and the fight for individuals against corporate special interests, the corporate giants that threaten everyone's freedom.
Governor Malloy, did you view...
Governor Malloy.
Who?
Malloy.
Hold on, sorry.
We're all tired, guys. We're all tired.
All right, I'm back. It's 2024. Governor Lamont, did you view the elimination of the state and local tax exemption under Trump to be directed as a retaliatory act of blue states? And do you fear anything along those lines this time? Blue states were more like Connecticut were more likely to expand Medicaid coverage. So what are your
Look, the president, it was a little like a game of The Price is Right, everybody bidding at the end of the campaign, but he said he wants to get rid of that, allow that deduction to come back, at least at a certain level. That would be very positive for the state of Connecticut and a lot of states that invest in education more than some of our peers do. And Mike, I think the election yesterday was a real wake-up call for the Democrats. I mean, it was overwhelming. And we can point to Trump's personality, whatever you want to say, but Democrats lost a lot of working families. We lost a lot of males. We lost males of different race, color, and creed. And it ought to be a wake-up call that we ought to be fighting for the middle class and fighting for them every day, and I think they feel like we lost sight of that.
Reflect on, moving forward, reflect on your rhetoric talking to those groups that appear to be moving away from the party?
I think I'd pick up what we're doing, as Susan pointed out, and where I thought Kamala started. She said, we're going to be an opportunity society. We're going to do everything we can, not through handouts, but to give you the tools you need, to get the skills you need, to get a better job so you get paid more, and maybe the opportunity to start your own business and own your own home. I thought that was a very compelling message, and I think it sort of followed along the lines of what each of us are trying to do here in Connecticut.
Governor, I was wondering, in terms of early voting, it was obviously very popular. 741,000 plus people decided to vote early this election. But there are always lessons to learn, especially the first time something is used as momentous as this was. I was just wondering, do you have any initial thoughts on possible improvements, changes that could be made to the early voting law?
I'm going to pass it over to a former Secretary of State, except to say, Paul, I think it worked. People like it. They like the convenience that we make it able for them to vote and vote on their time schedule. I think it was a win. We ought to continue it.
Yeah, totally agree. I'll just say there's going to be plenty of time this legislative session to take a look at how many people voted, the days and the hours that they voted, if there were any days where, like weekends, do we need to change or adjust? And so that's when we're going to have to engage all of our partners, all the registrars of voters and town clerks and the public. What did they like? What did they not like? How could we make it better? And I think taking a look at the hours, you know, in some places it was very interesting. A lot of people voted on the weekends, and in other places they didn't, maybe giving some towns flexibility on that. So I think that's kind of a longer conversation, and we have to take a hard look at all the data to see.
What about the length, the 14 days?
You know, I know one thing I'd like to look at is how many people voted on the weekend versus weekdays, because there was anecdotal evidence on both sides. Yes, people liked weekends. In some towns, it was not as popular. So I think we have to take a look, but generally, a huge success to have 740,000 plus people use early voting, and more than 100,000 people use absentee ballot voting. And I think we're going to have to continue the conversation, because if we open up absentee ballot voting, maybe we'll find that it's a combination of less early voting with more AB voting. We're just going to have to see how that works.
While we're on the subject of counting votes, Connecticut seemed like last time was one of the slower states in the country at actually getting results in. Does anyone know why that is and what might change so that that's not the case?
So I think one of the reasons that there wasn't sort of instantaneous result getting is because so many people voted early. And so that meant on election day, you had to be slitting open the envelopes and getting those ballots ready to be counted. And also because early voting was so popular, there was less time for election officials to prepare for presidential election. And, you know, all of us were out on election day, and no matter where we went, there was huge interest and huge turnout. So I think a combination of big turnout and a lot of early voting accounted for maybe later than usual results. And I think that's another thing that we're going to have to take into consideration when we decide how we can tweak it to make it more efficient and quicker.
I also wanted to ask Governor Lamont, you mentioned that in the Connecticut legislative races, Democrats picked up a few seats, obviously nationally, Republicans had a good night. How do you understand that difference? Is there something that national Democrats can take from Connecticut, or is it about the voting body, or how do you understand that?
I think we have a pretty good balance here in this state. We work together pretty well, as you heard Sean say. We work across the aisle. We balance the budget 6 times. We take law and order seriously. We also believe in an opportunity society, and we fight for Connecticut values and Connecticut rights. You might as well be consistent and clear about where you stand, and I think people kind of like what they saw.
But the Democrats have such an edge on the voter rolls in the state. I mean, there were 488,000 and some change registered Republicans. There were more than 813,000, I believe, registered Democrats. There were 920,000, unaffiliated. You guys can talk about, the Connecticut example, but Democrats, at least on the state level, have a huge advantage in terms of voter rolls and representation in our legislature. I mean, the Republicans lost control of this General Assembly in the mid-'80s.
Well, maybe that's because they think Democrats are doing a good job.
Well,
Can I just say in response, Paul, to your question and to Mike's question, I think the voters of Connecticut generally like the balance that we've had. Under the governors and our legislative leadership, we've been very fiscally responsible. And because of that, we've been able to invest in things that matter to people, like job training, free community college, expanding early child care, and so many other things that help people in their everyday life. And so I think maybe it's the balance that we have of fiscal responsibility and providing education, which is the key to economic opportunity, along with childcare.
Can I ask Lieutenant Governor, obviously one of the big things overarching all this is it's now the second time Donald Trump has denied a woman Democratic candidate that ability to break the glass ceiling. As the highest ranking woman who's getting governor, how do you respond to that? What's your feeling on that? It's now the second time this has happened.
Yeah, and it's personally very disappointing to me as somebody who is a big supporter of both Hillary Clinton and Kamala Harris. I don't think the election was just about gender. I think it was about pocketbook and wallet issues. And so that's what I take from it, and I certainly am personally disappointed for all those girls and young women out there who were pulling for Kamala.
Governor, you said there's a reason.
What did any of you learn during the first Trump presidency that might guide how you go into the second Trump presidency?
Well, I'll just add one thing. I was the chair of the insurance committee from 2017 to 2021 during the first Trump presidency, and we did a lot in state law to codify federal policy like the Affordable Care Act, where saying the 10 essential health benefits that say you can't be discriminated against if you're a woman having a baby, you have to be guaranteed to have mental health coverage, you can't be discriminated against because you have a pre-existing condition. We put a lot of those things into state law because we were worried about what would happen if they repealed the Affordable Care Act, which thankfully during his first administration they were not able to do. A lot of my colleagues with different germane committee assignments did the same thing. But as Senator Blumenthal talked about a few moments ago, federal law in some cases does supersede state law. And so there are limits to our ability to do that. But as we did several years ago, we will continue to see where we can codify Connecticut values into Connecticut law to protect our citizens from what might happen in a second administration. But there are limits to what our ability is to do that.
Will Connecticut stockpile more personas other Democratic states have done?
We're not going to do that because we consulted with Manisha Jutani, our public health commissioner, and it doesn't make sense to do that because if the FDA were to take away its approval of that drug, you're not going to have doctors who are prescribing it, so that doesn't help. Fortunately, there are some other drugs that are effective, maybe not as effective, but we'll have to explore those other options.
Governor, you said the Democrats should look internally at what the takeaway should be about what happened nationally. Are there any lessons of those national results that you think legislators in Connecticut who are going to be asking you to loosen fiscal guardrails and taking some other steps? Are there any lessons that should be internalized here among Democrats in that regard?
I don't think that's a lesson that anybody picked up from the national, because I got two candidates who didn't give a damn about the deficit, but
Everything else, I mean, it was about pocket.
I think it was about pocketbook issues. I think we took our eye off the ball there. We got to figure out those middle-class families are getting squeezed, the high cost of education, the high cost of hospitalization, the high cost of electricity, what we can do to make life a little bit easier for them. I think that should be our laser focus. I think it has been for the last 5 years.
Senator Blumenthal, what can the Biden administration and Congress to some extent do in the next couple of months as long as President Biden is president, to prepare for that?
Well, I'll tell you one thing we're going to do. We're going to confirm a lot of judges. And we haven't really discussed it here, but the United States of America is still the rule of law. We still have courts, and we have basic principles of law that protect individuals against abuses of power. When I say stand up and fight for values and principles and freedoms, some of those fights are going to be in the courts. So in the next couple of months, we need to confirm more of our federal judges. We have already confirmed an unprecedented number, considering the amount of time, and those judges are a bulwark. When attorneys general of the states go to court, federal judges will be making those decisions. When private individuals or organizations go to court, they'll be making a difference. We also want to pass the Kids Online Safety Act. As you know, it passed the Senate by an overwhelming bipartisan vote of 91-3. I think protecting kids online is tremendously important, and there's bipartisan support for it. So I hope that President Biden will push, as he's already endorsed, that measure as well. And then the National Defense Authorization Act. Not only important economically to Connecticut, because we make the submarines, helicopters, and joint strike fighters that are financed by that measure, but also to our allies around the world. We haven't discussed it here, but I've talked over just the last 5 hours to colleagues and other officials about the reaction is across the globe, perplexity, apprehension, and uncertainty about American leadership. So I think in the next 2 months, sorry, Paul, we need to confirm that America will stand behind Ukraine in its fight against Russian slaughter and assault.
That's what I was going to ask you. What do you think is the future of Ukraine policy?
Well, Lindsey Graham and I, we've made 6 trips to Ukraine the last 2.5 years. We're going to be fighting for a supplemental for Ukraine so that it will receive the resources it needs to continue the fight against Vladimir Putin's murderous assault and aggression against the people of Ukraine. And that's a battle that we must win, because Putin will keep going if he wins in Ukraine, and then we will be obligated to have troops on the ground under our treaty requirements. So we have bipartisan support for a supplemental. I hope it will be in the range of our last one, which was tens of billions of dollars. We've come back, Senator Graham and I, determined that we will work to get that across the finish line before the end of the year.
Yeah, we just heard about what will happen under President Trump's leadership in regard to Ukraine, American policy towards Ukraine.
I have deep concerns about what President Trump may do, not only as to Ukraine, but also as to NATO, and as to potential aggression by China, as well as needing to stand up to North Korea, which now is, in fact, putting troops on the ground in Ukraine, apparently. The insertion of those North Korean troops in Ukraine significantly escalates and endangers the fight there. So I think that there's good reason to be concerned about what both J.D. Vance and President Trump may do about Ukraine. And that's why the bipartisan support that we have for Ukraine in the United States Senate with Senator Graham and others is so very important.
So you said there's going to be a lot of federal.
The last question, we got to wrap.
So there'll be a lot of federal judges confirmed. Would you vote to fill a Supreme Court vacancy if one happened? For example, Justice Sotomayor retired. You criticized Trump for pointing so early to the election for Ginsburg's seat. Would you vote when they go to session?
You know, I'm not going to speculate on what may happen on the United States Supreme Court. There's no indication that Justice Sotomayor is considering stepping down. That's a decision for her to make. I think she's a great justice, and I don't think there is likely to be any vacancy on the Supreme Court before the end of the year.
Can I just clarify something? Sorry, apologize. On the mifepristone question, I want to make it very clear that today, right now, this minute, abortion remains safe, legal, and accessible here in Connecticut, and mifepristone is safe, legal, and accessible here in Connecticut. We have a court order from federal court in Washington State that I and my fellow attorneys general secured to make sure that Connecticut is protected, so I don't want any doubt about that. I share Senator Blumenthal's concern and the comptroller's concern about an attempt to enact a federal ban on abortion. We would fight that tooth and nail, not just through Senator Blumenthal, but in the courts. The U.S. Supreme Court said in Dobbs quite clearly, this is a matter for states, so they better respect that. Okay, this is Connecticut's decision. This is Connecticut's call about reproductive freedom and access to abortion, and we honor and respect that right. We've ensconced it in our law, and so I would argue if they try, that they cannot preempt Connecticut because it is a matter for the sovereign state of Connecticut to determine. Finally, I think what we learned in Trump 1.0 is when they say they're going to do something, believe it. Okay, the fall of Roe, the SALT tax deduction, the dismantling of the EPA, they mean it. And so that's why we have to be ready for all contingencies.
But we've also learned, you know, we have learned, we have agency. We have power if we use it. And the rule of law is something that's sacrosanct to everybody in this country, regardless of party and who's president. So I think that if we're ready for the fight, and I'm prepared for it, I've always fought and did during the 4 years of the Trump administration for the people of Connecticut against abuse of authority, against the misuse of power, against anyone who would do harm to our basic rights here. We can win.
One of the policies Trump has talked about most in his campaign was tariffs. I wonder what impact significant tariffs might have in Connecticut.
It's a big deal in this state. We do an awful lot of manufacturing. They import materials from all over the world. We just had Airbus here. They do a lot of supply chain here. They come from 100 different countries. And right now, they're trying to figure out how to calibrate the tariff on each and every one of that, what's that's going to do to the price of a jet engine. And with that, my 4 favorite words, hearing no further questions. Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody.
Good work. Thank you.